Hey, it's Webs here, and to my shock, we're getting some new mercenaries revealed today. I only expected the mini set to get revealed, and I guess we're getting 5 new mercenaries, all themed around Pandaria, which is kinda suspicious if you ask me, especially given that one tweet from before, even though the dev has went back on that tweet. There's too many Pandaren things showing up for me not to expect there to be some Pandaren-based news in the future for Hearthstone, though I could be completely wrong, and it could just be a Chinese New Year thing. That's always a possibility, but it's fun to speculate about that too. So we're actually getting our first mercenary exclusive event for the game mode, which is going to be an event where there's 10 new tasks, and then they'll give us one of the new mercenaries for free, along with 1,000 mercenary coins for the new mercenaries that are also being revealed, along with adding some new bounties into the game, which is actually pretty cool. If they keep doing this in the future, it might be an interesting way to keep the game fresh. Though already looking at some of the new mercenaries, it does kind of confirm that we're not going to get big changes when it comes to individual mercenaries that might be suffocating the meta. We're just going to get a bunch of counters for whatever mercenaries are meta instead, which I guess makes sense from a business standpoint, because people would expect some type of compensation for the nerfs out to their favorite mercenaries, but there's no easy way to actually do that given the fact that there are no wildcard coins, so people can actually use the coins on whatever mercenary they actually would like. And that would be my honest solution if they were going to do some big nerfs. But until they come up with some type of solution, I'm assuming we're just going to see stuff like this. Now, with the intro out of the way, let's go discuss the 5 new mercenaries. The first new mercenary, and the only one that isn't in World of Warcraft, is Long-Xin, who is a legendary dragon mercenary caster. Seems to be a arcane-based mercenary, which is actually pretty interesting. His first ability at level 5 is Celestial Breath, which does 19 damage to an enemy, and then any excess continues to the left or right, which is a arcane ability with a speed of 7. This is an interesting ability because it acts like rolling fireball from I don't know how many sets ago at this point, but it is going to be able to scale pretty quickly with the next ability of Starfire Blessing, which is a 2-speed ability at level 5, which has a cooldown of 1 and grants 3 arcane damage for 2 turns. And after the Merc is damaged, it deals 14 damage to a random enemy, which means at baseline this is going to be 17 damage no matter what, given the scaling off of Starfire Blessing. And Arcane already has Millhouse as another way to scale arcane damage, and will be seen later with the equipment that you'll probably be using with this mercenary. Another way to possibly scale arcane damage even further, which is going to be really cool. And finally, his last ability is a 1-speed ability, Among the Stars, which grants 13 HP to a ally and then swaps places with it. And then enemy abilities targeting that Merc swaps targets if possible. This is really interesting because it kind of pinpoints that the arcane synergy teams are going to be centered around messing with your opponent's mind, as between this and Blink Fox's 10th tail equipment, those are 2 ways to actually mess with your opponent, just because you're copying either their last ability used, or you're swapping places with Blink Fox so he can get a mana blink off, and then you can also just spam another Among the Stars the next following turn anyways. It's going to be a really cool combination to try out, and I'm looking really forward to it. His first equipment is Bottle of Infinite Stars, which makes Among the Stars also give 4 more health and also grants health to your dragons. So this is meant for a dragon-based team. If you're using a attack-based dragon team, this could be actually pretty powerful, just because you could make your dragons a lot more beefy. But otherwise, I don't see this equipment being used compared to another one of his equipments. The second equipment that he has is Kunlun Crystal, which makes Among the Stars start off cooldown and has the passive of 8 nature resistance. This is one of the examples that I meant when I said they're just going to print new mercenaries to counter old mercenaries, which is definitely not how I would want them to actually do it, because that just means more mercenaries released quicker. I guess that also means more money for them, but it's harder to keep up with the game if you get a new mercenary every month. And finally, the last equipment, the one that I'm most excited for, and probably the thing that you're going to use in every single build he's in, except in little edge cases like I mentioned before, which is a Battlecry equipment, Band of Bursting Novas, which has the battle cry, gain +3 arcane damage for each of your beasts and dragons that have died this game. This is a better version of Gul'dan's final equipment, which grants 3 spell power whenever a orc dies while he's on the board. It would be really cool if they actually swapped that equipment also to a battle cry, but I doubt that they actually are going to. It is really cool to see a battle cry equipment not being an additional unit on the board and instead a passive buff that actually can scale pretty quickly. And between this and Millhouse, I would say putting this down and then a Millhouse late game might be a decent way to actually have another way to finish off your opponent's entire board pretty quickly, given the fact that you could easily run a bunch of beasts in a team or a bunch of beasts generating tokens before you put down both this mercenary and Millhouse. Alright, now time for the first August Celestial of World of Warcraft. Chi-Ji, the Sacred Crane, which is a epic beast and is the one that we're actually all going to get for free if we do the event. Chi-Ji is one of the 2 August Celestials that actually support the Mistweaver Monk spec in World of Warcraft. And fun fact actually about this character, originally he was supposed to be the only one of the August Celestials that actually went into Mistweaver, but early on they thought red was a bad color for a healer to actually have, so they decided to actually merge Long into the spec too. And this is why we're actually seeing a lot of healing support in Chi-Ji as a mercenary, though I don't think we really needed this because there are already a bunch of healing based mercenary teams. I don't think this first ability of Blazing Song was absolutely needed for the metagame. It deals 10 damage and gains +3 healing power, which means your healing is going to do increased healing each time you actually heal. And I could see this being used in some type of heal build with Anduin, but honestly, I really did not want to see something like this. It's going to make those heal-based teams a lot more annoying. I like those teams, don't get me wrong, but it isn't something that the game actually needed at a current moment, though it does give a nice healer to the fire-based mercenary team, which is something that Fire did need. They didn't really have any way to actually heal besides Alexstrasza, and I could see maybe trying to put this Alexstrasza, Long-Xin, Blink Fox all in a same build just as a way to scale your arcane damage and your fire damage and your healing all at the same time. Could be a little bit interesting. Second ability Chi-Ji has is Inspiring Song, which at level 5 is a 4 speed ability, which restores 10 health to all friendly characters. Pretty good in a token-based team, also good in a fire-based team just because of the fact that you don't have many ways to actually heal, and it does scale pretty quickly if you're just spamming Blazing Song over and over and over again. This final ability is really cool and I actually like it a lot, which is Firestorm, which deals 5 damage to all enemies and restores 5 health to all allies, and it scales with the healing power that was mentioned before, which is actually a really insane ability. Like Zyrilla's final ability where she actually scales with while she's actually out on the board, but this is just a lot better because even though Chi-Ji is the only way you can actually scale healing power as it currently stands, that's probably going to be an insane combo to actually pull off because it's going to be a really tanky team whichever one you include her in, and honestly this is probably going to be a very strong mercenary. For the equipments, we have Blazing Ban, which makes Blazing Song deal 4 more damage and grant an additional 2 healing power. I'm assuming this is probably going to be the equipment that we're actually going to be using for the most part, just because of the fact it'll scale the last ability as much as possible, and also scales his healing ability too, along with whatever other healers you're actually running in the team. Staff of Chi-Ji is the second equipment. I don't really see this one being used as much, just because of the fact that I think this serves the purpose way better, especially if you get Chi-Ji to stick on the board for quite a few turns. And finally, the last one is Flameheart Crystal, which is actually pretty interesting. It's a passive that after a friendly beast is healed, grant them 5 HP, which is honestly probably a decent enough equipment, but I'm assuming the first equipment is going to overshadow this, even in a build where you could abuse this as much as humanly possible. And overall, I would say Chi-Ji is probably going to be in some type of team. He's going to make a lot of builds a lot more annoying than they already are, but it could be interesting to play around with him. He has a lot of potential in a lot of different builds. Alright, the third mercenary revealed today is Xuen, the White Tiger, who is a epic beast fire mercenary, and the August Celestial that is centered around the Monk Windwalker spec in World of Warcraft. His first ability is Equalizing Strike, which is a 7-speed ability at level 5, and then you choose an enemy, set this Mercs attack to 5 higher than the target, and attack them. This is a really funny ability. I don't know how useful this is actually going to be, though. It just depends on how relevant attack-based mercenary teams are going to be. I know currently they're not too relevant per se. Varying is pretty decent as it currently stands, and orcs can scale pretty quickly, so this might be a way to finish off an orc. This might be a mercenary to tech in if orcs actually become really meta relevant, but otherwise I don't know how useful this is going to be, just given the fact it is a 7-speed ability. Without having Valera on the team, I don't know how often you're going to get this off. And then the second ability Xuen has is Pounce, and at level 5 it is a 4-speed ability which borrows 5 attack from all friendly characters for 2 turns, and then it attacks the enemy. This is pretty decent overall, given the fact that you could use this in a build where you're not actually attacking much. I don't think this is a mercenary that's going to fit in a beast-based team, just given the fact that most beasts actually do want to attack, and they want their attack on their own. But this could be a really interesting ability to actually use to try to control the board, especially with the equipment that goes along with it, which is Celestial Chestplate, which makes Pounce also steal 5 attack from a random enemy, which is again another way to scale attack damage. But I don't know how useful this is going to be in a beast team, maybe an orc team, though I don't know if you would want to include it in an orc team just because of the fact it isn't an orc, but who knows. And then finally, the last ability, which makes Pounce actually pretty decent, which is Tiger Lightning, which deals this Merc's attack to a random enemy, and then if you get a death blow, gain +5 attack and repeat this. It's a nature ability, which means it scales pretty well in a nature team, which might be honestly a pretty good home for this mercenary, since most mercenary in a nature-based team don't actually attack, so you can borrow the attack pretty easily without worrying. His first equipment is Spear of Xuen, which makes Equalizing Strike set this Merc's attack to an additional 4 higher than the target, which is interesting to actually see, though I don't think this is probably going to be the equipment that's going to be used. I could see it as a big finisher, but I think either Celestial Plate, which I've already mentioned before, is going to be the equipment, or the final one, which is Charged Gauntlets, which grants Tiger Lightning for additional attack. And if you're scaling your nature damage as much as humanly possible, and you're using this in a nature-based team, this would be an additional way to scale the damage, even though it isn't direct nature damage scaling, and probably going to be the equipment that I would use the most on a mercenary like this. Overall, I'm kind of disappointed in this mercenary. There are some fun builds that you probably could use him in, but I don't think he's going to be as relevant as Chi or Long-Xin, who were the first 2 mercenaries actually covered here. Niuzao is the 4th mercenary revealed today. He is a protector mercenary who is a rare beast. He is the 3rd August Celestial, since we're getting all 4 of the August Celestials, and the one behind the tank-based spec of Monk in World of Warcraft. His first ability is Headbutt, and at level 5 it attacks a enemy. If the attack of that Merc is higher than this Merc, then you deal 14 damage instead, which is a neat little ability for an attack-based mercenary. I guess something like this is actually necessary for attack-based mercenaries to be kind of relevant, as you do take a bunch of damage if you don't have some type of built-in survivability tool or something like this. The speed is 7 at level 5. It's a decent enough ability, though I think it is a bit slow. And I think the second ability of Bullish Fortitude is the reason why you're actually going to run him in any build, which might actually replace Cornelius in some. It is a 2-speed ability at level 5 and has a cooldown of 1, which grants Taunt and makes your other characters take 5 less damage for 2 turns. This is the reason I said it might replace Cornelius, just for the fact that sure it has a cooldown of 1, but I don't really think it matters with this ability, because you can just replace it in the following up turn. And the final ability is probably what you're going to rotate between when you're using Niuzao as a mercenary in the team. It is kind of weird that they put a CD on it. I guess 5 less damage is something you don't want to have stack each individual turn, so I guess that might be why the cooldown is there. And finally, the last ability he has is Blessing of the Ox, and at level 5 it is a 3 speed ability with a cooldown of 1, and each time a friendly character is damaged this turn, give them Divine Shield. It's a arcane ability, doesn't really matter, but it is worth mentioning, I guess. This is straight up to counter Diablo. I don't know what other mercenary this is going to counter. I guess a fire-based team with Baron Geddon, but again, another example of Blizzard printing another counter to a already existing mercenary instead of nerfing whatever mercenary is actually the problem. Though I like this one a lot more because it does keep those abilities kind of in check that repeat over and over in a turn. The first equipment he has is Bullish Fortitude, reduces damage taken by 5 more, but has 1 more cooldown. Again, I don't know if this actually will affect it in any negative way. I think even if it has a cooldown of 2, you can still spam it every single turn on CD, and your other mercenaries are still going to take 10 less damage. This is going to make teams a lot more tanky than they already are, which is actually pretty good for a lot of the more squishy teams, but at the same time, it might be really annoying to face in the meta, and it's not something that I really want to see. It's definitely something that has a lot of potential here. I think Xuen, the previous mercenary, is probably the one with the least amount of potential out of all of these, but it just really depends. If I'm not reading this wrong, this shouldn't affect you just using this and always having 10 damage reduction no matter what, but I guess it does prevent you from using it in a starting up lineup if you do use this equipment. The second equipment is Helm of Niuzao, which is a passive that gives -2 attack but plus 16 HP, and after an enemy attacks this mercenary, deal 5 damage to them. I don't think this one is probably going to be good. This equipment is just kind of lackluster. I guess it's, if you always have taunt up, it's always going to be the one getting hit if you're in a attack-based matchup, but at the same time, it's just eh. And finally, the last equipment, which is probably the one that you're going to use, which is Talisman of the Ox. It's a passive that makes it whenever a friendly character loses Divine Shield, give them plus 6 health. So this is something that synergizes with some of the other Divine Shield mercenaries that already exist. And I can easily see this fitting in a team like that, just to make your team a lot more tanky than they already are. Yulong is the final mercenary being revealed today, which is the final August Celestial. She is a rare dragon protector mercenary, and it seems she's very much nature-based, which is actually kind of interesting. So at the same time, she does have their School of Magic. It is kind of interesting to see how she's supporting all 3 different types of dragon teams besides Shadow and Fel, I guess. But the main 3 are being supported through her. Her first ability is Jade Gus, which is a 10 speed ability at level 5, which does 20 damage to an enemy, and if they attack this turn, deal 40 damage instead. This is actually really insane if you can actually get it off on an attack-based mercenary, but otherwise, I don't see how useful this is going to be, just given the fact that, sure, it can scale off of nature damage, but you're not always going to get the 40 damage off. If you do get it off on a fighter mercenary, you probably are going to instantly kill it. So that's pretty cool, but at the same time, it's a 10 speed ability, so not many of those abilities get used currently in the meta when it comes to mercenaries, so I don't know how useful it's going to be. The second ability is the final example of Blizzard printing a new mercenary to counter problematic mercenaries. Jade Flame Buffet is a 1 speed ability with a cooldown of 1, which blocks taunt and stealth on all other characters for 2 turns and gives your characters plus 10 HP. And it's a fire ability, doesn't really matter because it's not actually doing damage. I guess it could matter with Antonidas, but for the most part, but if you're going to use Yulong in a non-nature based team, this is probably the only reason you're going to want to include her. it counters Valera. That's the entire point of Yulong, is to counter Valera. I don't know how useful this is actually going to be, but at the same time, if it counters Valera hard, because she is a fighter, they learned their lessons from Sky Admiral, I guess, this could be a really powerful mercenary, though it does kind of keep stealth-based teams out of the meta as long as people commonly use Valera in non-stealth-based teams, which is kind of sad, but at the same time, who cares? If anything can get Valera out, I'm glad, you know? Maybe we'll get some new, more interesting builds floating around. And the final ability Yulong has is Enveloping Mist, which is a 2-speed ability with a cooldown of 1, and it gives her taunt and +3 nature damage, and you repeat for other friendly dragons. So you could combo her out with War Master Boon, I guess. But at the same time, the only other nature-based dragon is Brightwing. I think Brightwing's nature. She might be arcane. I can't remember at this point. It's a decent enough ability. It gives a taunt on the board, which is nice when you're blocking taunt from all other characters. But overall, it might be a decent way to scale nature damage if you can find a way to merge a nature-based team with a dragon team, though I don't know how that's going to work out in the end. Could be really funny to try make work. Now for the equipments. I actually think these equipments actually make her a lot more viable than her actual abilities, which is actually pretty cool to actually think about. There aren't too many mercenaries like this, but at the same time, these all allow different builds to actually form around Yulong, and we'll see which ones actually do anything. The first equipment is Jade Fire Spear, which makes Jade Flame Buffet grant an additional 5 HP, which is pretty decent if you're using her in a team that you're not using a bunch of dragons. Otherwise, I don't think this equipment is going to see much play, but it still has its place in the meta in case she is used in teams that don't use a bunch of dragons. Serpent Pen is the second equipment, which makes Enveloping Mist give additional 3 nature damage, and if you are using her in a nature-based team, this is probably going to be the equipment for you. Otherwise, Jade Fire Spear is probably going to be the best equipment, and being able to scale your nature damage even further, even quicker with her means we're actually getting a lot of power creep in Mercenaries, which is not my favorite thing in the world to see. The game mode is less than 6 months old, and we're already seeing a stupid amount of power creep, which is kind of concerning, especially given the rate that we're getting more mercenaries. I had expected we were only going to see more mercenaries maybe when the next set comes out, but we're getting this already, which is really insane. I don't know if they're going to keep up this rate. I really hope they don't, but you never know. Pearl of Yulong is the last equipment, which gives a passive ability of your other dragons take 4 less damage. It should just read your dragons take 4 less damage. I get why they didn't want to make her even more tanky than she is, but it's like the Edwin equipment where it makes your adjacent pirates be quicker. Why not just make it your pirates quicker? There aren't that many good pirates. The only one I can name off the top of my head besides Edwin would be Eudora and Mr. Smite, I guess. Mr. Smite is used not in pirate-based builds, so it doesn't even matter there. I don't understand why they couldn't have just made Edwin also speed himself up. It's something that's frustrated me the entire time since he's been a mercenary. I guess they haven't learned that lesson, and we're seeing the same mistake in Yulong. Overall, I'm actually pretty impressed with these mercenaries on an individual standpoint. The only one I think has the least amount of potential is probably Xuen, though if you're using him in a nature team, there are additional ways to actually scale nature damage as is than there were before, which could actually make him kind of viable, but I still don't see him taking a place over something else that might be in the team, which is kind of sad to say. But the other 4 mercenaries I think have a lot of potential, and there's so many different builds. That's what I enjoyed the most about the last set of mercenaries too, is there's so many different ideas I can just run with. Even if they're terrible ideas, each individual mercenary actually supported so many different builds that it wasn't even funny. Like the build that I'm going to post tomorrow, which is centered around Captain Galvinger, and is honestly one of the builds that I wanted to do early on. I just didn't have him leveled up. I'm really looking forward to showing you all of that build, though this doesn't distract me from the one problem that I am going to have with mercenaries. I think from this point forward, they're releasing new mercenaries so quickly that it is really hard to keep up with having them all at a level where you can actually make builds. So I'm going to try to level these up as quickly as humanly possible. But given how much shit that's coming out in the next like few weeks from Blizzard, I don't know how much time I'm going to have to focus on leveling up these new mercenaries. I really hope I can get at least one of them working so I can put them in a new build next week or the following up week. But until then, let me know what you think about these new mercenaries down below. And if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, bye bye.